Hey guys, it's Hollywood Studios here, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be discussing a question that I'm sure a lot of us coaster enthusiasts have been having on our minds for the past couple of years, and this was recently ignited when I saw American Coaster Enthusiasts announce a new event that's going to take place in the fall, and that has to do with S&S's Axis coaster model. If you don't know, S&S is the company who manufactures rides like the Joker free spin clones at the Six Flags parks. They've also done Edgenica and Dynaconda, which are S&S 4D coasters similar to X2. They've also done air launch coasters like that of Max Force at Six Flags Great America. They have a pretty diverse catalog of different rides and attractions, a lot of really good rides. And a couple years ago, they unveiled a new model called the Axis coaster. They both built a prototype, which many people were allowed to ride, and they also put together a animation showcasing what the ride could do with the base layout. I'm going to show some footage of both the animation and the actual ride, and the reason I mentioned American Coaster Enthusiasts earlier is because they announced the fall conference, which will be taking place at both Lagoon and the S&S facility, and judging off the artwork for the event, I'm assuming that means those attending the event are going to be allowed to ride the S&S Axis coaster prototype, which is really cool. Definitely a unique opportunity for everyone going to that, so that's really awesome. But ever since that thing was announced, the model itself, we've seen no sign of it, which is really odd. However, I know that certain things have been showcased as of late that could change that, so I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video. For those of you who don't know, an Axis coaster may actually be finally getting built, but first I want to touch on stuff I had in my head before this announcement. Then we're going to talk about that announcement. It wasn't really much of an announcement, it was more so a rumor that looks pretty promising, so we'll talk about that in a minute like I said. But the Axis coaster is a ride model that looks like it's one of the most versatile and unique out there. And typically when we see a manufacturer come out with a model like this that's unique and different from what we've seen, a prototype, at least one, will wind up getting built. You look at the S&S 4D Freefly coaster from the same company. Six Flags bought one and then cloned it everywhere. You look at RMC's Raptor coaster, another unique coaster type. Six Flags bought one and then it slowly started to appear across other parks. So typically when a prototype is revealed that has promise to it, that looks unique and looks interesting, parks will buy it. And that's why I'm so surprised that nothing has been done with the Axis coaster yet. The Axis coaster was said to have a coaster being built in Europe, though nothing of this ever really surfaced, and still to this day that still has not really been confirmed or denied or anything along those lines. It is possible a park tried to work with S&S on building an Axis coaster and it just wasn't able to happen. It's also possible that there's things regarding the Axis coaster that we don't know, such as complications with its design or something, that prevented S&S from selling or building any Axis coasters. Although the prototype that they built at their facility looks like it's a pretty good ride, and it also doesn't look like it's terribly complicated. I'm sure those cars and those trains are very complicated and probably not cheap to build either. There's a lot going into them. They're basically a 4D free spin coaster train, just flipped around a little bit and with a couple extra seats added. It's pretty similar, but also pretty different. It's pretty much just an orientation change. But looking at the ride itself, there's so much potential and possibility with a ride model like this. And like I said, with other manufacturers and other coasters from this manufacturer, typically when a prototype that's really cool comes along, it will get bought, it will get built, and if it's successful, it will grow. So that brings me to where we're at right now, and I want to give a huge shout out to both Blue Loop and Coaster Hour to bringing attention to this. There's a park in Saudi Arabia that is currently being built. It's themed to Transformers and other such Hasbro properties. And what's really interesting, and wasn't mentioned in the article itself, is that in the concept art, we can see an S&S Axis coaster right there, just sitting there. Again, no mention of it has been made, nothing about it has been confirmed, but if you look at that train, you look at that track, that looks like S&S Axis coaster track and S&S Axis coaster trains. So what does this mean for the model as a whole? Well, for one, this means that of course it is no longer sitting dormant or anything along those lines. One, if this is true, has finally been sold, and we don't know anything about this ride yet. Like I said, this is concept art. For all we know, this could not even be an Axis coaster. The person who made the concept art could have just messed up and accidentally put an Axis coaster in when it's not going to be an Axis coaster at all. So take this with a grain of salt. But in this video, we're going to assume that this is going to be an Axis coaster, and we are finally seeing this model come to life. So what does this mean for the future of the model? Now that hopefully we have one getting built, I think that parks are going to look at the success possibilities with this attraction at the Hasbro park in Saudi Arabia, and if it winds up being great, not having much downtime, not being terribly expensive, I could predict that we'll see some more come along. However, if it has a lot of downtime and it's a difficult ride to deal with, obviously we're not going to see much more of it built. When you look at other prototype coasters that were built as of late that wound up coming into pretty big successes, taking a look at RMC's iBox hybrid coaster, as far as I know, New Texas Giant, when it first opened, really didn't have any major complications. Batman the Ride at Fiesta Texas, which was the first 4D free fly coaster, really didn't have many issues either, although they're not necessarily the most reliable rides out there, but they're not super unreliable either. Wonder Woman Golden Lasso coaster, which was the first RMC Raptor, along with Railblazer California's Great America, they were bought at the same time. Both of them, it took a little while for another park to buy a Raptor, so that tells me there might have been some issues with the prototype model, especially judging off the fact that there were new trains built for the second generation of the model. But we're getting a little off topic here. The main point is that SNS's Axis coaster was a model that a lot of us just kind of assumed was going to be a relic, a really cool novelty to go ride in Utah at their factory, but nothing that's ever really going to come to a real ride. However, with this development out of Saudi Arabia, it is possible that SNS's Axis coaster could have been revived from dormancy, and we may actually see a new one built. Like I said earlier, please take this with a grain of salt. We do not know for sure if this ride being built at the Hasbro park in Saudi Arabia is going to actually be an Axis coaster. There's been many times before where concept art simply does not match what actually winds up getting built, and that could be the case here. We don't know enough information as of right now, but I figured I'd share this with you guys as I was already thinking about making a video about the Axis coaster, had a lot of my thoughts down, and that's pretty much what the first half of this video was. But then once I saw that news come out, that's when I was trying to figure out how I could spin this video a little differently. So I think it's really cool to see that the Axis coaster may not just be dead and may not never be built, as if this is true, it looks like we may be getting our first ever SNS Axis coaster. Before we end off this video, I do want to just throw out a couple ideas I have for parks in the United States specifically that would be really good fits to have this Axis coaster. Again, this is assuming that it's actually being built at that park and that it may be successful, but I've always thought any of the Six Flags parks would be really cool to have one of these SNS Axis coasters. However, I'm thinking maybe not. It's possible that SNS and Six Flags maybe don't want to work together anymore. We haven't seen a free spin added in a couple years. Again, nothing about this is confirmed. This is just me making speculation based off of what we've seen. Six Flags hasn't really tried any of SNS's new coaster models other than Max Force, which was built at Great America in 2019, and from my understanding that ride tends to have a lot of downtime, so that could be what's scaring Six Flags away from pursuing an Axis coaster from SNS due to the downtime and reliability issues that Max Force had. It's also possible, judging off the fact that SNS did release a couple other models and a lot of people were expecting Six Flags to maybe buy them, maybe Six Flags is going to stray away from that. It's also possible with the new direction of Six Flags, they're avoiding rides that haven't been tried and true, like prototypes. They're going, at least in the 2023 season, they're going with rides that really aren't necessarily anything too crazy. The Skyline Piscetti Bowl coasters aren't anything too out of whack or anything too wild in terms of prototypes, so I'm not too sure how willing Six Flags is to experiment with different ride models. There's also the idea of the Palace parks like Kennywood, since they have a history of working with SNS, though my assumption is that since Steel Curtain had a bit of a messy opening couple of years, maybe that company is going to steer clear of working with SNS, but there's always the options of the Cedar Fair parks and the SeaWorld parks. SeaWorld parks are always looking to expand and innovate, and I think any of the SeaWorld parks or even the Busch Gardens parks would be a great fit for one of these coasters. Same with any of the Cedar Fair parks. I still think Cedar Point would be really cool to get one of these coasters, though that's just a pipe dream. If you guys agree or disagree with any of my thoughts or predictions and have any thoughts specifically on the Axis coaster model, leave them down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, guys.